The Absent-Minded Beggar is an 1899 poem by Rudyard Kipling, set to music by Sir Arthur Sullivan and often accompanied by an illustration by Richard Caton Woodville. The song was written as part of an appeal by the Daily Mail to raise money for soldiers fighting in the South African War and the families. The fund was the first such charitable effort for a war. The chorus of the song exhorted its audience to pass the hat for your credit's sake, and pay, pay, pay. The patriotic poem and song caused a sensation and were constantly performed throughout the war and beyond. Kipling was offered a knighthood shortly after publication of the poem but declined the honor. Vast numbers of copies of the poem in sheet music were published, and large quantities of related merchandise were sold to aid the charity. The Absent-Minded Beggar Fund was an unprecedented success and raised a total of more than £250,000. History. In September 1899, it was clear that the crisis in South Africa was likely to turn into war. By the 2nd of October, all military leave had been cancelled, and urgent preparations were underway to send a large expeditionary force to the Cape, with horses and supplies being requisitioned and mobilized. On the 7th of October, a proclamation was issued calling out the Army Reserve. Of 65,000 liable men, around 25,000 were intended to be called up for service. Many, if not all, of the men thus mobilized were ex-soldiers in permanent employment for whom returning to military duty meant a significant cut in their income. In addition, there was no contemporary legislation of the time protecting the permanent employment of reservists. Employers could, and often would, replace them with other workers, with no guarantee that if the soldier returned he would be able to take back his job. As a result, many families were quickly plunged into poverty, since a lifestyle comfortably maintained on a workman's wage of 20 shillings could not be kept up on the infantryman's shilling a day. As if this were not enough, there was no guarantee that the husband would have a job to return to, even without the prospect of injury or death. A number of charitable funds existed to support these individuals, most notably the Soldiers and Sailors Families Association. But a number of private appeals were also made. Simultaneously, a wave of patriotism was sweeping the country, catered to by jingoist newspapers such as the Daily Mail. Many of these newspapers were also involved in the charitable fundraising efforts to benefit the reservists and the dependents. The Daily Mail proprietor, Alfred Harmsworth, had publicized efforts to help soldiers and the families. This drew the attention of Rudyard Kipling, who produced The Absent-Minded Beggar on the 16th of October 1899 and sent the verses to Harmsworth on the 22nd of October with a note that they are at your service. Turn over to any one of the regularly ordained relief funds as a portion of your contribution. I don't want my name mixed up in the business except as it will help to get money. It's catch penny verse and I want it to catch just as many pennies as it can. It isn't a thing I shall care to reprint, so there is no need of copywriting it in America. If anyone wants to sing it, take care that the proceeds go to our men. By the 25th of October, Kipling was plotting with Harmsworth on how to maximize the fundraising from the poem by having it recited at music halls. He suggested finding a composer to set it to a common plus catchy tune. The poem was first published in the Daily Mail on the 31st of October 1899 and was an immediate success. Maud Tree, the wife of actor-manager Herbert Beerbohm Tree, recited it at the Palace Theatre every night before the show for 14 months, and other performers recited it at music halls and elsewhere, giving part of the profits to the fund. The country's premier composer, Sir Arthur Sullivan, was immediately asked to set the poem to music. Sullivan had written some 20 operas, including 14 comic operas with W. S. Gilbert, and a large volume of songs, orchestral pieces and other music. Although he was in the middle of composing his next opera, The Rose of Persia, Sullivan agreed. Both Kipling and Sullivan declined proffered fees for creating the song. Artist Richard Caton Woodville, within several days, provided an illustration titled A Gentleman in Khaki, showing a wounded but defiant British Tommy in battle. This illustration was included in art editions of the poem and song. In 1897, Sullivan had agreed to compose music for Rudyard Kipling's poem Recessional, but he never completed the song. When asked to set The Absent-Minded Beggar to music 2 years later, Sullivan found Kipling's verses so difficult to set that he told his diary, "If it wasn't for charity's sake, I could never have undertaken the task." Still, the experienced composer completed the music in 4 days, on the 5th of November 1899. The first public performance was sung by John Coates, under Sullivan's baton, at the Alhambra Theatre on the 13th of November 1899, to a magnificent reception of an overflowing theatre. Reception. Sullivan's music captured Britain's jingoistic mood, and Sullivan's diary entry notes wild enthusiasm. All sang chorus. I stood on the stage and conducted the encore. Funny sight. With characteristic grace, the composer wrote to Kipling, "Your splendid words went with a swing and enthusiasm which even my music cannot stifle." Kipling, on the other hand, described the music as a tune guaranteed to pull teeth out of barrel organs. The Daily Chronicle wrote that, "It has not been often that the greatest of English writers and the greatest of English musicians have joined, inspiring words and stirring melody in a song which expresses the hard feelings of the entire nation." Sullivan's manuscript was later auctioned for £500 towards the fund. Critic Fuller Maitland disapproved of the composition in the Times, but Sullivan asked a friend, "Did the idiot expect the words to be set in cantata form, or as a developed composition with symphonic introduction, contrapuntal treatment, etc.?" Quote, "The poem, song and piano music sold in extraordinary numbers, as did all kinds of household items, postcards, memorabilia and other merchandise emblazoned, woven or engraved with the gentleman in khaki figure, the poem itself, the sheet music, or humorous illustrations. Some of these items were very expensive. 40 clerks answered 12,000 requests a day for copies of the poem, and it was included in 148,000 packets of cigarettes within 2 months of the first performance." Alternative arrangements of the song were published, such as The Absent-Minded Beggar March. The Daily Mail's charitable fund was eventually titled the Absent-Minded Beggar Relief Corps, or the Absent-Minded Beggar Fund, providing small comforts to the soldiers themselves as well as supporting the families. Among other activities of the Corps, it met the soldiers on arrival in South Africa, welcomed them on the return to Britain, and, more importantly, set up overseas centers to minister to the sick and wounded. The fund raised the unprecedented amount of more than £250,000. The money was not raised solely by the Daily Mail. The poem was publicly available, with anyone permitted to perform or print it in any way, so long as the copyright royalties went to the fund. Newspapers around the world published the poem. Hundreds of thousands of copies were quickly sold internationally, and the song was sung widely in theatres and music halls, first being heard in Australia on the 23rd of December 1899. Local Absent-Minded Beggar Relief Corps branches were opened in Trinidad, Cape Town, Ireland, New Zealand, China, India and numerous places throughout the world. All of this contributed to the fund and to other war efforts. such as the building of hospitals. The fund was the first such charitable effort for a war and has been referred to as the origin of the welfare state. In December, after the first £50,000 was raised, the Daily Mail asserted, "The history of the world can produce no parallel to the extraordinary record of this poem." The popularity of the poem was such that allusions to it were common. Mark Twain wrote that the clarion peal of its lines thrilled the world. By the 18th of November, less than a month after publication of the poem, a new patriotic play was advertised to open the next week, titled The Absent-Minded Beggar, or The Queen and Country. The same month, the charity organization Society called The Absent-Minded Beggar the most prominent figure on the charitable horizon at present. Even a critical book on the conduct of the war, published in 1900, was titled An Absent-Minded War. Kipling was offered a knighthood within a few weeks of publication of the song but declined, as he declined all offers of state honors. Historian Stephen M. Miller wrote in 2007, Kipling almost single-handedly restored the strong ties between civilians and soldiers and put Britain and its army back together again. A performance of The Absent-Minded Beggar March on the 21st of July 1900 at the Crystal Palace was Sullivan's last public appearance, and the composer died 4 months later. The Absent-Minded Beggar remained popular throughout the 3-year war and for years after the war ended. It became a part of popular culture of the time, with its title becoming a popular phrase and cartoons, postcards and other humorous representations of the character of the absent-minded beggar becoming popular. The song is performed in John Osborne's 1957 play The Entertainer. The song is still heard on reissues of early recordings and on post-World War II recordings by Donald Adams and others. In 1942, George Orwell noted that the phrase "killing Kruger with your mouth" was current till very recently. In 2010, a Kipling conference called "Following the Absent-Minded Beggar" was held at the School of the Humanities of the University of Bristol, organized by Dr. John Lee, that included lectures and an exhibition of memorabilia and documents relating to the poem and song lyrics.